Thanks, Ray. A new addition to What's New in Minerals this year will be What's New from New Mexico. First, I'd like to let those who don't already know that in August of last year, I left Miami University, where I was a professor for the last 25 years, and became the mineralogist for the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and the senior curator of the Mineral Museum here in Socorro, New Mexico. We'll start this first portion of What's New in New Mexico by taking a look at some of the important recent acquisitions of our museum. These include new finds within the state that have occurred in the last year or so, but they also include specimens that have been out of the ground for quite some time. The first specimen we're going to look at is a recent find within the last 4 weeks from the Hansenberg Mining District in the Oscura Mountains, Bingham, New Mexico. We're looking at the Oscura Mountains from the north, and I've marked the two different fault blocks, HMD, for the Hansenberg Mining District. The fault block on the right is where the Blanchard claim and the Sunshine mining adits are found. The specimen was found up in that region of the district. This photograph shows underground workings in the Sunshine number 3 adit. It's not the locality where the specimen I'm going to show next was found, but it shows you what the mines are very much like throughout the district. They're limestone hosted lead zinc fluorite deposits and barite, and fluorite is the most abundant mineral within the district. This is a photograph of the pocket, the actual pocket from which the specimen was collected. And what you can see here are lime or pale green fluorites that line the pocket. And in the front of the pocket that's not as strongly illuminated, you can see dark cubes of galena that are altered on the surface to anglesite and cerussite. The specimen is a very large piece, very fine large piece of green fluorite that came from the back of this pocket. Here it is soon after being taken out of the pocket. Uncleaned, it's still in very good shape. Didn't need much washing to clean it up. It's about a foot across, or just over a foot across, and is quite heavy because of galena that makes up a large portion of the matrix. Here's the specimen after simple cleaning with a water gun. You can see the beautiful rounded green fluorite crystals. These are actually strongly modified hexoctahedrons and tetrahexahedrons in terms of their morphology. They're quite translucent, and you can see in the center of the larger mass of crystals a dark area, and those are galena crystals that are buried deep underneath. At the surface, several galena crystals are showing on the center and lower portion of the specimen. This is one of the finest green fluorites that's ever been produced out of the Hansenberg Mining District, and was quite a nice addition to the collection in Socorro. The Hansenberg Mining District is the largest of a series of deposits that are known as Rio Grande Rift barite fluorite galena deposits, and these extend from Albuquerque south to actually down into Mexico. There are numerous locations that have similar types of mineralization, and a relatively obscure location that's of the Rio Grande Rift type deposit is the Lorraine Prospect in the Dairy District, Sierra County, New Mexico. This is just south of this town of Truth or Consequences. And this is one of several adits and a shaft that has been collected over the last couple of years by Brandon Chafee and his partner, and several of the specimens fluorite specimens they collected in 2020 have been added to the collection at the museum in Socorro. These are pictures of Brandon Chafee and his collecting partner Cade Harrison at the Lorraine Prospect. The image on the left is looking from down below up to the adit and shaft entrances that you saw on the previous slide, and the image on the right is Brandon rappelling down to the lower levels where the fluorites were collected. This is the first of two specimens that I'm going to show that we acquired from the Lorraine Prospect. It was a gift from Brandon Chafee. He collected it with his partner in 2020. It's 18 centimeters across and shows beautifully the unusual habit for this deposit type. These are actually fairly large octahedrons that are then overgrown by smaller cubes. And the white material that you see on the surface is actually inclusions of the smectite mineral dicite just under the surface of the fluorite. There's also a band of very fine-grained quartz on the left side of the specimen. This is a close-up of one of the larger octahedral crystals that is then overgrown by a mosaic of smaller cubic crystals. You can see what is oftentimes known as Mayan temple habit. We're looking close to down the A-axis of the large octahedron. What you didn't see in the previous specimen is that the purple fluorite is actually overgrowing an initial layer of green fluorite, and this is typical of the paragenesis in the Rio Grande Rift type deposits. Early fluorites are colorless and green, and then later overgrown by purples and blues. Here's a specimen from the Lorraine prospect, which we purchased from Brandon. It's a beautiful example of the green cubic crystals, and again, the white edges are not fluorite, but they're inclusions within the fluorite crystals of the mineral dicite. I'm very pleased to show the next specimen and the fact that we were able to acquire it for the museum. It's one of the most important copper specimens, in my opinion, that has been preserved from New Mexico, and it's from the Chino mine, also known as the Santa Rita mine in Hanover, New Mexico. This is a photograph of the Chino pit taken in 2002. It's a large open pit copper porphyry deposit, and occasionally they will encounter veins in which native copper is found, and Stan Espenshade has had a contract for the last 10 years or so where when they encounter one of these veins, if there are important specimens, he's able to collect them and preserve some of them for collectors and for the museum. I want to show a close-up of the specimen first because of the intricate crystallization. Essentially what we have are arborescent crystals of native copper, and the detail or fidelity of crystallization down to the smallest crystals is just amazing. Now this is actually a fairly large piece. I'm going to show it in whole in just a moment, but you can see the fine scale crystallization in this original photograph. Here's a full view of the specimen being held by Phil Person. Phil was the one who actually acquired it from the collector who owned it and brought it to the museum for first refusal, which I'm very happy about because we were able to get this into the collection. It's 35 centimeters across. I'll show views of it on both sides. Again, it was collected in 2013 by Stan Espenshade and cleaned by him, and it remained in the collection of a geologist at the Chino mine up until recently, and Phil was able to acquire it from him and then brought it to us. The next two images are professional photographs of the specimen with a scale bar of 2 centimeters. The piece is about 35 centimeters across, and the degree of crystallization is similar on both sides. It's just a magnificent piece to look at and study. And here's the other side of the specimen, again showing the fidelity of crystallization. The specimen was actually collected in 2013 and cleaned by Stan that year for the geologist who kept it until 2022. It became available to us, as I had mentioned, at the New Mexico Mineral Symposium, and we were able to raise funds through a donation by Nancy Attaway, one of our supporters, one of the benefactors of the museum, and funds from the Friends of the Museum organization that we have saved over the last 2 years. This next specimen is a recent acquisition. We acquired it only about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Its age is probably much, much older. We don't know when it came out of the ground, and in fact, the provenance is not certain, but it is very likely, and we're looking into the full mineralogy of the matrix to help confirm this. It's very likely to be from the Waldographic mine in the Magdalena district in Socorro County, New Mexico, the location where the Kelly mines, famous for the blue smithsonites, occurs. The specimen is about 7 centimeters across, and the individual azurite crystals that you see in the center there are about 2.5 centimeters high. If this is indeed from the Waldographic, it is one of the finest azurites ever found in New Mexico, in my opinion, and a beautiful addition to the museum collection. Here's a slightly different view of the specimen. It's associated, or the azurites are associated with goethite, malachite, rosazite, cerussite, and several other phases that we have yet to identify, but again, X-ray diffraction work is being done to fully quantify the paragenesis of the sample. This specimen is a recent acquisition, quartz and hematite. What looks to be rose quartz is actually colorless quartz with very fine-grained hematite inclusions near the surface. That's what gives it the rose-looking color. And it's from the Winston Chloride area in Sierra County, New Mexico. It's about 5 centimeters tall and was a gift of Tony Podacek. Tony collected this in an area that was inaccessible to most at the time back in 1982, and the specimens, he hasn't seen anything similar since that time. He recently released this one as a donation to the museum, and it's a beautiful example from the find that he made back then. Another specimen donated to the museum by Tony Podacek is this exceptional ludwigite from Quartzite Canyon in Idaho. It's 11 centimeters across with very large, well-defined crystals, probably some of the best of species in the find that Tony made. As I'm going through these specimens, you'll note that we have a lot of very generous benefactors to the museum, and I want to thank them all very much for all of the support they've given us this year and previously. One of our biggest donors is Joanne Masagay, and I want to show 2 specimens that he donated to the museum this year. This is a beautiful little specimen of herringbone style arborescent copper crystals from the Chino mine. We saw one previously. This is probably an earlier find, circa 2003, given the style, and it's just a magnificent little miniature. Joanne gave quite a few specimens to the museum this year, so I've just chosen 2 of them, 2 of my favorites. This is a bornonite, pyrite, and goethite from Bolivia, 7 centimeters across. And the bornonites show very sharp, lustrous, cogs wheel style twins on matrix, showing the nice paragenesis from the deposit. Another one of our major benefactors is Marty Zinn, who has generously given specimens for many years to the museum. This year, a small suite of specimens, but exceptional in quality, include this beautiful fluorite and quartz from Huanggang, Inner Mongolia, China. It's 20 centimeters tall. You've seen these fluorites on the market for quite a few years now. This is a particularly exceptional specimen, showing these modified cubes, slightly hoppered with overgrowths of different habit along the edges of the cube and the corners. In our collection, we have yet to have a good rhodochrosite from the Sweet Home mine, and surrounding states to New Mexico is one of our specialties. Our primary focus is New Mexico minerals, then surrounding states of the Southwest. And so a Sweet Home rhodochrosite is really a significant specimen for us. And Marty gave us this beautiful piece, 8 centimeters across with crystals up to and exceeding 2 centimeters, highly lustrous, very, very sharp, and high degree of translucency to transparency. The last few years we've received several major contributions from Claire Schaefer in memory of her father, Christopher Hayward. Christopher was a prolific Colorado collector, particularly of the Pikes Peak batholith, and she donated several flats of Pikes Peak specimens, including this beautiful Amazonite Manbach twin, and the major crystal there. It's 9.5 centimeters across. This is just a sampling of specimens that are currently on display of some of the recent donation of Amazonites from the Pikes Peak batholith from Claire Schaefer, again in memory of her father, Christopher Hayward. Another recent acquisition from Colorado, and also a recent find, is this beautiful topaz from the Park County in Colorado, and it was donated to us by Nancy Attaway. a magnificent gem crystal of aquamarine of intense color and amazing diaphaneity, essentially flawless internally. Another beautiful gift from Nancy Attaway this year. At the end of April, I attended the Arizona Mineral Symposium in Phoenix, and afterwards I visited the collection of Richard Mies. Richard is a collector from Phoenix, Arizona area, and he donated his self-collected mineral collection to the museum this year, and I want to show a few of the specimens that I particularly enjoy. This is a 3.3 centimeter euhedral wolfenite crystal from the Red Cloud mine in La Paz County. Just a beautiful example from that deposit. Again, self-collected, and it turns out it was collected on the same day that Graham Sutton was there on his very first mineral collecting field trip. Another beautiful piece of, in this case, linerite and quartz from the Grand Reef mine in Graham County, Arizona, self-collected by Richard Mies. Again, you can see the luster in the photograph, but until you actually move it around, it's quite stunning. The beautiful color and the absolutely superb luster on this specimen. Also with the association of quartz crystals in the druze is very, very nice. The final specimen I want to show you today is a smithsonite that I acquired at the Denver show in 2022. This is actually the first specimen I purchased for the museum. And we got it because it is a dead ringer for the smithsonites from the Kelly mine in the Magdalena mining district, not far from Socorro here in New Mexico. The blue color in both the smithsonites from the Kelly and the Republic of Congo are due to the presence of micro-inclusions of our calcite acting as a pigment rather than what most people have believed to be copper substituting for zinc in the zinc carbonate structure. And that is why these specimens from both locations look very similar to one another. These were brought out in 2021 and 2022 by Tomek Prashker of Spirifer Minerals, and we acquired this specimen from Tomek at the Denver show. Our next presenter is Evan Owen, and he's going to show you some of his recent diggings from New Mexico.
Thanks, John. I'm Evan Owen, an economic geologist at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, and also a graduate student in geochemistry wrapping up his thesis on rare earth element-bearing fluorite veins in the Guayanus Mountains in New Mexico. I'd like to spend a few minutes showing you all two of the many exciting mineral collecting localities I've been able to explore over the last couple of years. I'll start with the Pataca district in the northern part of the state. The Pataca district is well known for its NYF pegmatites that were historically mined for sheet muscovite as far back as the 17th century. However, as interesting as sheet silicates are, I'm after spicier minerals. Here's my typical kit for hunting the numerous radioactive rare earth element species that can be found in the district. My two scintillators allow me to find decent crystals of monazite, columbite, euxinite, thorite, and others. I'm lucky to often have good company when driving the 3.5 hours up to Pataca from Socorro. Here's my twin brother Kyle on the left, and John, another graduate student, at the Globe Mine investigating a large mass of yttrofluorite. I also collect fluorescent minerals, and yttrofluorite is known for two distinct fluorescent responses under short and long wave ultraviolet light. There were some thunderstorms threatening to impede an afternoon of collecting, but the storms passed, thankfully, and left us with a beautiful rainbow. Who knows what sort of radioactive pod of rare earth minerals could be found at the end of that rainbow. The sunset view from the Globe Mine a little while later was equally impressive. After dark, we spent a little time poking around for larger, less fragile chunks of yttrofluorite. As we left that night, the sky cleared up and gave us an amazing view of the Milky Way. This was a 30-second long exposure taken with my phone, which turned out better than expected. But you all didn't tune in to see a bunch of nature pictures, did you? Let's take a look at some of the specimens I've found on my trips to Pataca. Here are 3 large, sharp monazite crystals I found in the district. For the locality, these are quite good. I particularly like the specimen in the back with the quartz and muscovite matrix. I can only imagine what the largest crystals that came out of these mines looked like back in the day. Next up is a sharp, lustrous columbite crystal. All of these radioactive specimens were found with my scintillators, and usually buried up to around 8 inches. I wrap a sheet of lead around one of my scintillators with an external probe, which allows it to pinpoint the direction of the source as I'm digging. Now we'll take a trip down to the Cuchillo Negro district, northwest of Truth or Consequences and about an hour and a half from Socorro. Here's the adit to the Dictator mine, a carbonate replacement deposit mined for silver, lead, and zinc, and one of the few mines in New Mexico that were able to economically recover willemite as a primary ore mineral of zinc. This slumping adit entrance is being guarded carefully. And here's a zoomed-in view of the rattlesnake that was guarding the adit that afternoon. The view at sunset from the Dictator mine was quite beautiful. This was one of the first mines I explored after arriving in Socorro to start my master's degree. Now that the sun is setting, it's time to get out my homemade shortwave ultraviolet lamp and get collecting. It didn't take long to find some impressive outcrop of limestone that has been cut with vividly fluorescent hydrothermal calcite veins. While this picture is a little overexposed, some of the calcite I found here is every bit as bright as calcite from Franklin, New Jersey. Here's another outcrop of similarly veined limestone on the way to the dump where I hope to find some willemite. Jackpot! Here's a beautiful vein of calcite with variably green fluorescing willemite. It's been cut by a quartz vein with some small blebs of scheelite. Unfortunately, this boulder was a bit too large to haul back, and the textures were far too nice for me to break it up into bits. You generally won't find very large multicolor fluorescent specimens when collecting on the dump, but some of the small pieces really pop. Here's a beautiful pale green Jimmy crystal of willemite and calcite that I found while lamping the dump. And here's the same specimen under shortwave ultraviolet light. I'm too afraid to do any prep on this piece to expose more of the willemite crystal, so for now I'll enjoy it as is. This calcite is as bright as any Franklin calcite in my collection. Here's a family photo of some of my favorite fluorescent specimens I found at the Dictator mine. While some of the willemite is bright green, other specimens show a duskier bluish green, reminiscent of willemite found in the Trace Hermanas or some of Arizona's occurrences. The willemite is generally very phosphorescent as well. I've also found a few pieces of colorless smithsonite, which fluoresce pinkish red to purple. Hydrozincite is also seen locally coating some pieces. In the top right is a piece of quartz with brightly fluorescing blebs of scheelite. The Dictator mine has been one of my favorite fluorescent localities I've collected at to date, but unfortunately is no longer practically accessible, as a prominent New Mexico landowner has blocked road access to the mine. I hope you enjoyed this little show and tell of some of the fun mineral collecting I've done so far here in New Mexico.
Thanks, Evan. The last thing I'd like to discuss is the 43rd Annual New Mexico Mineral Symposium. Very similar to the Rochester Mineralogical Symposium, it's meant for professional and amateur mineralogists interested in mineral specimens and collecting. For details as they develop, go to geoinfo at nmt, that's newmexicotech.edu. And we've got a full page that will be posting new information as this goes along, and you can also register for the symposium at this site. When you go to the site, you'll have to navigate to the museum and then to the symposium. This year, the symposium will be held from November 10th through the 12th, although on Thursday, November 9th, there will be a field trip hosted by Ray DeMark and Mike Sanders up to the Hansonburg Mining District. On Friday, we will be having our very first micro-mineral aficionados gathering, something similar to the Microminers Playroom at the Rochester Symposium. And this is being organized by Jay Penn and the Micro-Mineral Group of the Albuquerque Gem and Mineral Club. That will be on Friday from 9 a.m. till noon prior to the symposium. In the afternoon of that Friday, Patrick Rowe, Michael Michalik, and Scott Braley are hosting a 3-hour workshop on taking photomicrographs or photographing microminerals through the microscope and using billows. Later that evening, or Friday afternoon, is a reception in the museum for friends of the museum members, and anybody can become a friend of the museum. It's an organization to help support the museum and the efforts we have, such as the New Mexico Mineral Symposium, and that is Friday afternoon. Saturday and Sunday, we have a day and a half of formal talks. Most of them are 30 minutes long, although one is given by our featured speaker, who will have a 30-minute talk and then an hour-long presentation, and I'll announce who our featured speaker is on the next slide. On Saturday night, we have a very fun banquet, which includes a live auction. There's also a silent auction that's held during the symposium, and these are both used to raise funds for the symposium and for the museum. And this year, our featured speaker is Dr. Eloise Gaillou, curatrix of the Mineralogy Museum of the École des Mines in Paris. And Eloise, again, will be giving 2 talks, one on the history of the mineral collection at the School of Mines, and an hour-long talk that is to be announced in terms of the topic. We'd like to have anybody who's interested in coming down to the symposium, please do so. It's a live event. There will not be an online component to this, and it's very much, in terms of camaraderie and fun and learning about minerals, very much like the Rochester Symposium.